Starting off, when a player runs out of gadgets to use, the gadget icon below their brawler will actually disappear. This is information that can make all the difference in a match, so be aware of who can still use their gadgets and who cannot. Also, if you've spawned a pet or a turret that is now too far away for you to see, you can actually check if it is still alive by pressing the gadget button. If your pet has been destroyed, it will say that you need one in order to activate the gadget, but if it's still alive, it will say that you're too far to activate it. Obviously, this only works if the gadget has an effect on whatever you're checking on. Tip number 3, there are certain gadgets in the game that have limited range, and if you hold down the gadget button, it will show you that gadget's range. If you only want to see the range without activating the gadget, just slide your thumb off the button and then let go. Tip number 4, 3v3 modes are almost always best played in 3 lanes, left, middle, and right. Typically, you want to play one brawler in a lane because it makes it harder for the enemy to hit you and gives you an advantage if the enemy team bunches up. This is because it's way easier to hit a target if 3 of them are close to each other, because if they're all separated and you miss, there's no chance of it actually hitting another target. Now, if you're playing either the left or the right lanes, you can try to force the enemy to bunch up near the middle by taking control of the edges of the map. This is done by getting between the enemy and the edge of the map, obviously if you're playing on the left or the right lane. You'll have to be careful not to get backed up against the wall, but if you do a good job at avoiding enemy fire, you'll pressure the enemy toward the middle of the map, which forces them to bunch up. Along the same lines, you want to always look to pinch out enemy brawlers, especially in 3v3 modes. Pinching a brawler is a term for 2 teammates attacking an enemy from different angles, making it impossible for them to avoid getting hit. So even if you're fighting somebody else 1v1, pay attention to any other opportunities where you can fire off at a different enemy, so you can then help your teammates win their 1v1s. Now, another tip is to actually purposefully, well, not purposefully miss your shots, but if you miss a shot, you can use that to pressure the enemy to move them where you want them to go. Sometimes players can be really hard to hit if they're good at avoiding your shots, so instead of trying to predict where they're going with every single shot, just keep aiming on the same side, and then that'll end up pushing them toward your teammates. Tip number 8 is to be prepared to switch lanes in the middle of a match, and if a brawler that counters yours is in your lane, it's a really good idea to switch with your teammate. Keep in mind that even if you're playing well in your lane, it might still be a good idea to switch depending on how your teammate is doing in their lane, because they might be struggling against a counter themselves. Now, other than Eve, brawlers obviously can't stand on water, but there are a few brawlers that can jump on top of water or like roll on top of water. And for those brawlers, you can actually add a little extra distance by aiming the end of the attacks toward the middle of the pond. This works great for brawlers like El Primo or Daryl, because if the attack lands close enough to the edge of the pond, the brawler will just be forced to land outside of the pond. It's not always practical, but it can be useful in some situations. Now, obviously, there are many brawlers in the game with regular attacks that only fire 1 or 2 projectiles. Brawlers like Belle, Jessie, or Nita. When you start facing off against really good players, it's incredibly helpful to have the attack damage values for these types of brawlers memorized. Whether you're using these brawlers yourself or if you're up against them, it's so important that you always know when you're in danger of being killed in 3 shots and when you're not, since most brawlers can deal all of their burst damage in just 3 ammo. Even if you don't want to memorize each one, pay attention to how much damage they do when they hit you early on in the match, so you can at least remember it throughout that match. Tip number 11. Always check your bushes if you don't know where the enemies are. This tip may seem obvious to a lot of you, and I've said it before, but I am shocked at how many times players will walk into bushes because they're fairly certain that there aren't any enemies waiting in them, and then they get killed instantly. In my experience, bushes are only safe if you know where all 3 brawlers are. Skilled players are really good at dodging attacks even while hiding in bushes, and they can play some seriously good mind games. Up next are some game mode specific tips. In Knockout, once you defeat an enemy, it's better to heal and regroup rather than immediately charge the other enemies. A 3v2 is a huge advantage in any game mode, but in Knockout, it's especially useful. If you end up isolating yourself from your teammates, that advantage won't have its effect, and it'll be the same as if you're in a 1v1. Now, you don't want to be right next to your teammates, but you do want to be close enough that your enemies can't take you out without getting punished for it. Also in Knockout, don't be afraid to wait until the smoke rolls in to win the round. I see a lot of players get impatient even when the enemy team has the long range advantage. If the enemy team has an advantage in longer range, just take cover until the smoke forces players closer to each other, and even though this is boring, it's a lot better than losing because you weren't patient enough. Now in Hot Zone, playing good defense is the only way to make a comeback on maps with more than one zone. If the enemy team takes an early lead, it won't matter how much you control a zone if you can't keep them out of the other zone. So you should prioritize making sure that the enemies can't get into one of the zones that they have not captured yet until after your team takes a lead. On the flip side, if your team takes an early lead, it's a good idea to play aggressively toward the zones that you haven't captured until you know that you can fall back to other zones that may be closer to your spawn point. Now, when you're playing on maps with only one zone, I often see players die and rush right back to the zone one after the other, only to get 3v1'd and die again. If your team is dying, it's way better for you to just wait for your teammates to respawn than it is to take turns getting obliterated, as long as you still have enough time to fully group together without them actually controlling the zone. Now, in Heist, your goal is to stay alive near the enemy safe for as long as possible. Obviously, you want to attack it as much as you can as well, and you do want to prioritize attacking the safe over enemy brawlers, but more important than attacking it is staying alive near the enemy safe, because it forces the enemy to go on the defense. And if they're on the defense, not only can they not attack your safe, but it gives your teammates time to join you on the offense. Also in Heist, avoid fighting low DPS brawlers that don't have their super if you can. So I'm talking about brawlers like Nita or Jessie. They're very popular choices in Heist, but if you don't let them charge their super on you, they're pretty much useless in comparison to a lot of other competitive options. In a lot of situations, brawlers like those can be ignored on your save as long as you don't feed them their super. Now in Brawl Ball, if you have the ball and you're going to take a shot while someone is defending, you'll score a lot more goals if you move in one direction and aim in the opposite direction toward the goal. Players are used to reading foot movements, and that's why aiming the opposite direction usually works so well. Also in Brawl Ball, focus on gaining map control until you are very sure that you can get the ball into the goal. Until you're able to actually make a goal, keep your ball close to you or your teammates, but don't pick it up until your team actually creates the right opportunity to score. And as a bonus tip, try to not kick the ball near enemies, since they'll likely kick it to a corner, which will make it difficult for you to get to. Another tip, which may seem obvious, is to always look to score in Brawl Ball. Sometimes players get really caught up in those 1v1s that they don't realize that there's actually an opportunity to score the ball. This is especially true in competitive matches where players are used to trying to take out enemies before they try to make a goal.